Hi, my name is Clare and I'm the mother of 3 teenagers with FASD.
I'm Jessica, a PhD researcher specialising in educational interventions for children with FASD.
And together we are the hosts of Spotlight on FASD, the UK's first podcast dedicated to shining a spotlight on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
FASD is a condition caused by prenatal alcohol exposure that affects hundreds of thousands of children across the UK.
And we're here to bring these conversations out of the shadows and make sure that no one living with FASD feels alone.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spotlight on FASD. This week we are going to be talking about how to discuss a diagnosis of FASD and just generally how to discuss FASD as a condition with a child or young person. So we know that this is like a really important topic actually when an individual is first diagnosed as well and you want to communicate that information, but more so as they grow and they've got a lot of questions and things, and you know it's just about sharing ideas of how to frame these things in ways that they may understand. And if it's something that you're having difficulties with or facing challenges with at the moment, we just want to bounce some ideas around really and see if there's anything there that might help you.
Yes, I think I was trying to gather my thoughts thinking about it and thinking back to when I told my children about their diagnosis and how I told them about it, and I realised that there was no specific sitting down, I need to tell you this, and I started to think about all of the different circumstances and the different journeys that lead people to diagnosis, because one thing we know about FASD is diagnosis it's rare, it's usually very, very difficult to get and can often take years of going down the wrong road. And I think when it happens to a lot of people, it's huge relief. And I think, you know, it's weird. I remember I was with my sister, one of my sisters, the day that the final diagnosis came through at the Centre for Life in Newcastle. That's where I got my diagnosis for my 3. And I had gone down so many dead ends and thought I was going crazy for so long that when the diagnosis came, I remember, and I think this set the tone actually. My sister and I walked out, we weren't with the children, we walked out, and as we were walking past the receptionist at the Centre for Life, we just looked at each other and we high-fived. And that wasn't kind of making light of this diagnosis that my children had just got, but it was like right, okay, that's that hurdle over. Now we start, you know, and then we looked at each other and we did start and laugh. And again, not making light of it at all. This is my experience of my personal journey. But I did think this must look really odd to that secretary that I'm walking out after a diagnosis with a kind of genetic scientist and we're high-fiving each other. But it was relief. And then I know that I didn't talk. I certainly didn't rush home and tell the children. It wasn't really age appropriate at the time.
How old were they?
So I'm just trying to work this out. 16, 17, 19, 21, so 13, 12, 13, 8. Like 8, 9, 10. They were just, when we started, 7, 8, 9. When diagnosis came, 8, 9, 10. No. Like 9, 10. Like 9, 10.
Around that age.
Yeah. And so it wasn't like they weren't in the teens, they didn't have that level of awareness. They were small enough to have been able to, I dread to think of now, I wouldn't be able to get them to the appointments that I needed to get them to then to do, it wouldn't have happened. So I think that plays into a huge problem of diagnosis. Like there is no way I could have got certainly my boys to any appointments now, so diagnosis just wouldn't come. So they were little enough, they were primary school age, they were little enough to get to appointments, and it was just kind of, we talk about our muddles a lot, and that's what we call our difficulties when things are just a bit muddled up. And I was honest to say, we're just trying to get to the bottom of why we have muddles and, you know, why muddles make your life trickier, you know, so, and that was as much as I went into it. And I think, you know, there are so many ways to look at it depending on the experience you've had with diagnosis and also the age, which I think
definitely
that causes another difficulty, because if you have a diagnosis, some people have a diagnosis from very, very early years, and it's totally not age appropriate to talk to a toddler about that. They just wouldn't understand it. And so people just don't, and then they sit on it, and then at what point? You know, it kind of probably makes it a bigger deal for them than it needs to be. And I said to you earlier, I've noticed this week, I don't know why, I don't know what's going on, but this week I've noticed a lot of talk online, a lot of online forums about asking for advice of how people told their children that they had FASD, how they talked about it. So like initially explaining it to them. So it has been on my mind all week, actually trying to think back.
Well, hopefully that means that there's more people like having access to diagnosis and things. Like if it's something that, you know, people are starting the journey of, that it's come to the forefront of their minds as to how to discuss it. And, you know, you already had that framed with your three of muddles and referring to them as muddles. And I think naturally most families will, you know, create some sort of word or description of what it is, the challenges that they're facing, in order to be able to deal with it, because, you know, we can't actually use any scientific labeling. It's not, as you say, it's not age appropriate, but finding something that does work for you, and you still use that word, don't you?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's what we use, muddles, because it's just it's kind of a non-offensive word, and it's not a scary word, and it's not it's just, and it's I just think it's an excellent description of what's happening. Things are muddled up, and muddles might look like very quiet and don't want to talk, or muddles might look like mattress has been thrown down the stairs. There are a huge variety of levels of muddle, but that's just what we'll call them. And I like to do that because I don't ever want them to feel shame or to feel guilt about their symptoms, because they are symptoms. So when they're having a big muddle, and if things are getting smashed, they are symptoms. So I like to use that word across the board, so that we don't, you know, I purposefully won't use like meltdown or like, you know,
got very negative
tantrum, because that's not what they are. And if somebody was having an epileptic fit, you would not, or a diabetic hypo, you wouldn't say they were having a meltdown. It would actually be really offensive to say that. So you know, and so I like to use the word muddle for no matter how severe they are, to have it on a level playing field, so that my kids know that when they're muddly, and it doesn't matter if that just means I don't want anything to eat, get out of my room, or if it's something a lot more physical, they're acceptable. It's what's going to happen. It is a result of their brain injury. It is not their fault. It's what's going to happen, and I'm here to help them through it, and to teach them how to help themselves through it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, because I've heard of, or I'm aware of children that I've come across who have been very young, sort of probably 4, 5, 6 years old, who've spoken about their FASD without using that label. You know, no awareness whatsoever of that label, as you know, to my knowledge, and have used other terms like fuzzy brain or wobbly brain, or something, the way that you use the word muddle, and not have it connected to anything, because it's, I think, that deeper explanation of, you know, as soon as you start talking about it as FASD, as that label, it becomes more of a, so where's this come from? Why do I have this condition? And that's when all the whys and how and everything has started, which opens a whole nother can of worms with a condition such as this. And I've also come across children who and I don't know, I do wonder now how their parents and caregivers have got around it, but they're familiar with the label. I have FASD, it's a very matter-of-fact statement, but there's little, or there appears to be anyway, little consideration of where that came from or how they have that. It just seems very accepting that I have FASD, that is the reason for my struggles or my challenges. But I've also come across children of 10 or 11 who have been adopted and are very matter of fact. My birth mother or my tummy mummy, whatever terminology they're using, drank, and it's caused me these problems, and I was taken out of her care because she was unable to look after me, and now I'm with this family. So sometimes that very black and white matter of fact thinking can help frame that, but it,
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think that I've been working out in my head, so mine were 9, 10 and 11. That's how old they were when we got diagnosis. And it was young enough for me to be able to have kind of full censorship over what they knew and didn't know, because I was determined. And at that point, I hadn't entered into the world really of FASD, and I had no true idea of the stigma attached to it. But I just knew that I was determined that my children wouldn't, or as much as I could help them, there would be no anger or blame, or there would be as little as possible, and none of it would ever come from me. They would never hear a negative tone in my voice about how and why this happened to them, just that it was just how it was, and this is how we were going to deal with it. And I think, but they were also old enough to see how it was impacting. They were struggling so much in education at this point that it actually helped me, for them, it helped them kind of welcome. I'll never forget welcome the diagnosis, me 11-year-old, when and how I remember with him how I did it. Do you know, it was, I made such a little deal of it that I can't really remember exactly how I told all of them. I told them separately, and I told them at separate times. And to be honest, I think one of them was about 18 months apart. And when they were that little and they've got their busy lives, they certainly weren't going to sit and converse with each other. Mum says, I've got FASD, have you? It just wasn't happening. But when I told my 11-year-old, I remember saying to him that, and I went, oh, do you know what we've worked out? What we've found out is, do you know how you are so clever with Lego? And when your brother's Lego isn't working properly and he can't find the instructions, and you can look at something, or if you've built a huge piece of Lego and something's fallen apart, I said, you know how you can look at it and think, right, I know what I need to do, and you can fix it, because your brain can solve these problems so quickly and so easily. And I said, we now know why. It's because you've got something called FASD. And it happened when you were inside birth mom's tummy and you were born with it. And it's given you all of these extra things. And so all I talked about was the extra things at first. And I was saying, you know, how good you are with animals, and animals are just very calm around you, and you feel calm around animals. That's because of it. And how you love music. And he's going, all right. And I said, but some of the things that do come with it as well is it makes your memory very, very tricky, because he had come to me at that point and said that he was worried that he was forgetting too many things. I remember he said, I used to be able to do time, and now I can't do time anymore. And he meant telling the time and clocks. And I said, things like time and money, it's really, really makes those tricky, because your brain didn't develop evenly, and it gave too many powers to those parts. So you've got extra powers in all of those parts that your friends haven't got, but it took those powers from those parts. So you have difficulty with that. And I will never forget it. And he went, oh, that's good, because I thought I had dementia. and he'd watched a great grandparent. He'd kind of had a few years of her with dementia and deteriorating, and he used to get really frustrated because he just thought that his memory was getting worse and worse, and he knew what dementia was and he thought he had it. But that'll have just fleetingly come across his mind every now and again, and he'll forgot to ever say it to me, have I got dementia? It wasn't worrying him that much, but so he and I just went, oh well, that's brilliant news, and because you haven't, and this is what it is. And if there are so many things that your brain can do that other people's brains can't do, but we need to give it extra help to do these things. And he was just like, right. And it wasn't, and it was at least 2 years later before there was ever a conversation again about how did it happen again inside. Because I think as he got older, he was picking up on the world of alcohol.
Yeah.
So he's like, how did it happen again? So we talked about that. And he asked me, was that on purpose? And I said, definitely not. There's no way that any harm was ever willed on you. No one wanted to harm you at all. Just, birth mum didn't know enough to know that was a really dangerous thing to be doing. And he was just like, oh, right. And then just really quite accepting, and obviously took my lead. Now, I know if I had have sat down and been like, oh, something I need to tell you, you've got this, it's a brain injury, that would set the tone for the rest of his life.
Definitely.
And his attitude about it, So I wasn't blasé about it at all, because obviously it's a huge deal, but I'm very good at spin, and it was my finest work, because I knew it would shape how they all felt about it forever. Yes. And I was determined that they didn't want to have anger linked to it, or to have as little anger as possible linked to it. Yeah,
definitely. And it is like what you're saying there about framing it and playing to the strengths as well, because it can be very, very negative, and especially with what we know of in the world, it's still, there's a lot of stigma attached to it, and it's still quite a negative diagnosis. And, it's only probably fairly recently that strengths are talked about. And, this is a bit sad, I was reading through my literature review today because I was editing it. And at the very, very bottom, I had a section on strengths of individuals with FASD. And I was like, oh, need that in a later chapter, and I need that in a later chapter. And it was just talking all about this creativity and music and good with animals and very, very caring and all the things that you're talking about. So framing that as, you struggle with these things because your brain gives more power to all of these things that you're so wonderful at. That's something that they can connect with, that makes sense. And so it's framing this condition as not in any way like some huge life limiting, and
because it doesn't need to be, and what we know. So
no, exactly
what I maintain, the decade that my children lived with this brain injury, when it wasn't diagnosed and nobody knew what we were dealing with, I maintain that is absolutely caused more long-term difficulty than the FASD.
Yeah.
If the diagnosis had have been when I first adopted them, the difficulties wouldn't be anywhere near what they are now.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
So I think the more we even know the last 2 or 3 years, the huge growth in our FASD community worldwide, and the fact that social media makes that so easy. I think if someone were to go back and look at everything, you can see how parents and caregivers have over the years have just started to join the dots with each other, and my child is amazing with horses, well, my child is amazing with this, and we've started to realize, because it is unbelievable, isn't it, that there's literally a list, and there are very few children with FASD who these things aren't their strengths.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something in it. You know, at the point that I was explaining it to my children, I was winging it. And I'm not saying that I was making it up, but I was just verbalizing in a way that I knew they love to paint pictures in their minds. I was just verbalizing what I witnessed between the three of them, because I wasn't part of any kind of a community then, and I was just I was very solo in the whole FASD world. And then it was such a comfort for me when I started to got involved with different networks and started to see that there's so many children, you know, that with exactly the same strengths and the same struggles. So it I think it makes it all less scary for everybody involved. It's like, it makes it a little bit less of the unknown about it. And as each month that passes, it becomes less scary because we're learning more and more.
Yeah, definitely. And this, you know, I just thought this reference that I was talking about that just listed like all of these strengths of individuals with FASD that I was reading today, it was from 2007. Mm-hmm. And I read that and like, where has, like, they knew that information, and it does fit perfectly. Every child I've come across, every parent I've spoken to, their children can tick most of those boxes. And yet all we hear about is the negative side. So I think, you know, when having those conversations, it's really, really important to understand those strengths. And if this child is new to you, if you're a foster carer or, you know, recently adopted or anything like that, you know, if they've come through kinship care, anything, if you don't have that level of knowledge of their strengths, if you haven't got the ability to say, well, I know that you're fantastic with horses because we've never seen them with a horse, you know, you can start to frame that as like, what do you love, and what do you feel that you're really good at, and start building those strengths, because at least then they're acknowledging it as well, you know.
And I think that, like, quite often the children, like my children, the things that they are just naturally gifted, they don't particularly see that as a strength. That is just that's just part of them. So right, certainly for people who find themselves, you know, being the primary carer of a child or a young person with FASD, it could be really, really daunting, because if you do Google, you're going to find all of the, you know, the physical symptoms, the you know, the mental, the emotional stuff. So there really does need to be something published about the strengths and the plus sides to an FASD brain. So have we just talked ourselves into publishing some work? We need to do that.
See what we can do.
It is true, and I think that we've so there's been lots of talk this week that I've been kind of had my eye on and getting involved in a few conversations about how I did it, people asking advice, you know, and I think across the board everyone had responded with you know, there doesn't need to be a formal, you know, I've got some news kind of thing.
Table and
and we're gonna, there are lots of resources. So if you don't feel equipped, or that if you don't feel that you have the knowledge to be able to explain that, and there's it is emotional, and nobody knows the journey that you've been on. So there are lots of lovely resources now that there never used to be, exactly for this, exactly about how to, and they can be used at any point in the journey. And I think it's reminded me that it's probably a little while since I've talked about the science behind it all, certainly particularly with one of my children. So this week when I've been looking at these resources, I've thought I don't need them to explain that this is what you've got, but it can do no harm to revisit and say, remember, when this is happening or when that's tricky, it's because of this, but that's why you find this easy. So I think that I'm going to go over some of them certainly with one of my children over the next couple of weeks, because I think that I know that it relieves them when they understand that, you know, one of the first things my daughter said was, you know, oh, I just thought I was just being a bit stupid. That's just what she had accepted. She just thought that when she was getting frustrated and couldn't do some of the things that she wanted to do, she just...
Yeah. That's it, isn't it?
So I think
an understanding for them is as much as it is for you. You know, they find out answers as well. And it's, yeah.
The total relief to, and I think I certainly underestimated the fear that was attached to it. And I think, but, you know, I certainly did it then. What I know now about developmental trauma and the fact that my children just hover on fight or flight all of the time, they're every waking moment. So, you know, my son, when he's thinking, hang on a minute, last week I knew how to tell the time on that clock and I can't do it as good now. That must just be tipping him into fight or flight all the time. And so at the age... God, it's weird how I kind of block so much off because so much has happened in my life. But I'm thinking now, at that age, just before we knew what we were dealing with, his symptoms were very, very difficult for him and school and us at home to manage. Very, very difficult. But if you think that, you know, he's 10 and a half, approaching 11, and all of these things that he could sometimes do, he was noticing that sometimes he couldn't do them, but then he could do them again, but then he couldn't do them. And that's classic FASD. So school were getting frustrated because they were, you know, like, well, this is your writing, you did it. You do know how to do these. And then he's looking at it thinking, what the hell? That is my writing. I did do it and I can't do it now, so I need to get out of this situation. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to make a silly noise and make everyone laugh, and let's just get us out of this classroom as fast as I can. And they became like survivors, and some of the tactics that they used were brilliantly clever, but not socially acceptable in a classroom. And that's where the problems start, and that's where the disengagement with education starts, and then that's where the stats kick in. So I think that it's not, you know, there is an age at which it helps them to know, to understand what's going on in their minds, but I think it's not something, because adoption, I was adamant that from the very, very beginning, my children knew that they were adopted and that I didn't make a huge deal of it. It was part of who they were. And from being tiny, like my daughter certainly didn't understand the word. And she used to say that she was a dib-dab. She couldn't even say the word, but we would talk about lots of different things. And you've got blonde hair and you've got blue eyes and you're adopted. And we just made it part of absolutely normality.
Yeah.
I never had the opportunity to do that with FASD because it was, you know, a decade down the line before we got the diagnosis. But I think that it's not something, I do obviously wish that I had a diagnosis 10 years before, but if I had had a diagnosis 10 years before, I don't think it's something that I would have talked about with them when they were so young that they didn't, you know, I think there is an age where it's a good time to filter in bits of the information so that it makes sense of certainly the difficulties that they're having, but can try and frame it with the strengths.
Yeah, definitely. And those resources that you mentioned, that, you know, they're great any age, even adults, I think, and the parents to get involved in as well. There's the National FASD have recently launched a website called Me and My FASD. That's, you know, loads of young people on there talking about their condition. Like, check it out, it's amazing. We'll put the link in the description, YouTube. Yeah, and then there's
resources that were
there's a Canadian website as well that's mefasd.com, and it's got a little character, like a little cartoony kind of character that I don't know what it is. He looks a bit like a rubber, bit like a tooth, bit like a sort of chair. Yeah. You'll see what I mean when you see it. And that's got loads of interactive like games and videos and things, and it goes through this little character, and it just, they're like little animations that talk about the different strengths of FASD and the different challenges of FASD, and it just looks like such a good way to frame it, even if your child, young person, has no interest in interacting with the websites themselves. But you can take ideas from them. You can take, you know, the stories, take inspiration from them. You know, there's a growing body of support out there that can help. And also something that I found really beneficial that I was writing about my PhD today is a sense of belonging and a sense of community for those once they do understand what they've got, and that it's not just them. And I know your three children have each other and aware of that all three of them have the same diagnosis. But something that I've noticed over the years working with camp as well is that, you know, kids will go, oh, well, you know, I don't have any friends at school because I've got FASD. And then you'll slowly see it trickle through the group. I'm like, well, I've got FASD as well. I've got FASD as well. And that realization that all of a sudden they're in a place where, you know, they've never met anybody else with it before, but all of a sudden they've been brought together. So I know that's really hard at the minute with all the COVID stuff, but if you can reach out to other parents online and in these online communities and things, and even, you know, share a photo and be like, okay, this is my friend, whoever, and she's also got a little boy with FASD, or she's also got a child with, you know, and just making it like less isolating.
Do you know what, that's just made me think, I do this, and I don't do it purposefully, but I'm going to do it purposefully from now on, at least once a week. Certainly my daughter, because my teenage boys, like, there's a huge element of normal teenage boy, and I am the last person they want chatting to me in the bedrooms. But my daughter still loves the crack. She loves me stories. And I always find myself sharing at least one story that I have come across on an FASD forum that week, where it's made me think of her, and I'll say, do you know with your FASD, when this happens, well, this little girl, and it'll always be a positive story, and she'll go, oh yeah, well, that's what happens. Mm-hmm. And actually, she probably just forgets about that, but how that makes me feel, mm-hmm. how unisolated and, you know, kind of like I'm in a little bit of a community, that makes me feel safer, and that is going to translate through to how I am with the kids and what they pick up off me. And I think that would be my biggest tip for somebody who is about to go down the road of talking about a diagnosis with their child. Drench yourself in the positive stuff as much as you can. So the websites and Instagram, there's absolutely tons that just seem to be popping up more and more, and they are predominantly positive. And I know some people think, well, that's not painting a true picture, but we just don't need to dwell on the difficulties. We're not saying that they don't exist, but we in our camp don't want to dwell on them. We want to focus on the positive bits, deal with the difficult bits. We're not shying away from them, but we just want to talk and celebrate the positives. And I think that the more I read the positive stuff, watch the positive things, watch the Instagram stories of some of the American pages where they're using funny videos, that just lightens me up a few notches about it all. And then that translates into how I talk about it with the kids and how I talk about it with other people. And because there is a danger that if you start and read the literature, and if you can just be sucked down a very negative hole.
Definitely. And like you said, your daughter probably does forget those stories. And it's probably not, you know, like been captured by her memory, those specific stories that you share, but she's experienced the feelings that come with those stories, and she's experienced that, and in that moment all of her emotions have been lifted, and that she won't forget. She might forget, but her body, like her body will not forget that. And that, you know,
the feeling of happiness she had when she was laughing with me about it. There was someone had shared a video, so they'd shared the video, and it was a lovely little video, and she went, "Oh, look, he's got the eye shape that I've got." And I said, "Yeah, he has." And she just went, "I love my eyes, absolutely love my eyes." She went, "They're like, I look like a little bit of a cat." And I said, "I know, you've got absolutely gorgeous eyes." She went, "I know I have." And it's like it's positively framing, you know, you've got a beautiful, look at the beautiful shape of your eyes, that's because of that. And, you know, you could, and a lot of people do, you know, say, you know, these are abnormalities.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could say, look how stunning eyeliner looks on that eye.
Yeah.
You can choose which way you want to look at it and which way you frame it for them.
Which is so important for teenagers as a whole, and young girls as a whole, that like body image. But, you know, especially with these, you know, you don't want to be framing them as abnormalities at all. There's so much negativity and weight to those sort of words that will be remembered. Mm-hmm. And it's that thing, isn't it? I can't remember what it is. My mum always used to say it takes it takes 10 positives to wipe out a negative when you're talking to children. Is that it?
Probably, yeah. Probably it probably does, yeah. To be the harm. Well, you know it yourself. That's compliments don't stick in your mind, but a criticism does. And how many compliments would it take for you to undo how that criticism made you feel? So, you know, that's probably a case. And, you know, coming from teaching, that she probably witnessed that herself.
Yeah. I wish I'd pay attention to that quote now.
No, but you've got the right idea. That, you know, that is the gist of it, isn't it? And I think, completely. You know, I think that we need to, and this is everything that we are about. That choosing to focus on the positive bits all plays a huge role in ridding the stigma, and that is our mission, for people to be able to talk about it and talk about the diagnosis without stigma. That's what we need to be doing. And each time you have a positive interaction about FASD, you might think it's having no impact, but it's the whole ripple effect, and it is erasing the stigma step by step, word by word, and that's the only way we can do it. So we've just got to keep doing that.
Definitely. So yeah, I mean, as we said, we will definitely put those links to those resources that we've spoken about in the description box on YouTube. If you are listening to this, please go and have a look at those links. Search them down on YouTube. And yeah, you know, we just, like Claire said, we want to keep all of this lighthearted, and our aim is to rid the stigma around this condition. And I think the conversations that people are having with individuals with FASD very, very much plays a part with that. And yeah, that's all. And well, before we say goodbye for this week, I just wanted to very quickly say, like, thank you to everybody who gets in touch with us. Sometimes I feel like it's just Claire and I chatting about FASD, which we do. But you know,
we'll check our inbox and we're like, oh, people getting in touch.
Yeah, we get so many people with so many different stories from so many different backgrounds that I never would have expected. You know, they all get in touch to say that, you know, I've experienced this, or they want to share ideas with us, or they simply want to say, thank you, now I feel less alone. And it really means a lot. It's really motivating, actually, for us to continue doing this, because honestly, it's a weekly struggle to carve out an hour in our schedules that matches up.
No joke.
And you know, it takes a lot. It's not easy, and it takes a lot. And it's really, really great to hear from people that what we're doing is actually like making a difference and impacting them. So thank you all very, very much for that.
If anyone is listening to this, and if anyone is thinking, have got anything that they would like us to talk about, a question that they would like to ask that we can then discuss, please reach out and get in touch with us. And don't ever think that, obviously it's totally anonymous anyway, don't ever think that there could be a silly question or an inappropriate question, because I know the thoughts and the questions that I've had over the years about, what's going to happen, what about this, so please don't keep that to yourself, because we air that out for you, and we definitely will be able to make you feel better about whatever it is. That is actually a promise, because it's probably already happened to me, and I've probably got a funny story about it that it's funny in hindsight, probably wasn't funny at the time. So please reach out if there's anything you want us to talk about, because we are here to make you feel like you're not going through this journey alone. So we want to talk about what you want to listen to.
Yeah, definitely.
So thanks.
Yeah, that's all for this week. Thank you again so much for listening, and please remember to tune in next week.